call because the pot odds are 30%. So what people will do, will just go, okay, 185 plus 242 in the pot. There's $427 in the pot. It is 185 to call. I've got 37% equity. It's a plus EV river decision. EV calling the river barrel now is plus $41. So they'll be like, okay, well, good deal. I made a plus EV turn play and a plus EV river play. So overall, my decision has to be pretty good. Of course, 63% of the time or whatever, your opponent is going to flip over, queen, king, aces, pocket nines, and you'll be beat. But I think players will just kind of chalk it up to a cooler, like I've got jacks, they just happen to have me beat. And when they are ahead, then 37% of the time they're like, oh yeah, I'm a pretty good bluff catcher. Like my game is on fire. But as I said before, it's not the correct way to think about it, because let's go back to the turn. Let's say on the turn, we know a lot about our opponent, and we know that on the turn we've got 35% equity. And we're facing a bet of $70. So on the turn, it looks like a $15 plus EV decision. But if we know that they're going to fire the river 100% of the time, then we should really be factoring that into our turn decision. So let's say we know that they're going to make that $185 river bet 100% of the time. Well, if we know it's coming with certain, with certainty, then why wouldn't we add it into our turn decision? So instead of calling $70, we're actually calling 70 plus 185 if we expect on the river we'll have enough equity to call, which on the river we're going to have 37% equity. We need pot odds of 30% on the river, so we're going to expect that we have to call on the river, if that makes sense. So instead of just calling $70, we're actually calling $255, which is $70 plus the 185 we have to call on the river. And so the total in the pot is now 102 plus 70 plus 185 that we're expecting, that it's implied that he's going to bet on the river. So there's 357 in the pot. We have to commit $255 to try and win that with only 35% equity. Actually, our odds are way worse because it's implied that he's going to bet $185 every single river. If that's the case, then calling turn and calling river will actually lose us $41. So that's kind of quite interesting. Like, clearly, if you're going to be facing a river bet a lot of the time, you don't get to realize the full value of your turn call. Also, it's a little bit unrealistic, I guess I would say, for someone to be betting the river 100% of the time, but it's just kind of an extreme example that shows that if you are going to be faced with a river bet some percentage of the time, it definitely will cut into your turn profit, and if it's enough of the time and you don't have that much equity, it can be possible for it to be a rather large negative EV play to call the turn if you're going to be forced to call the river. If we run through another quick example, like let's say on this turn, we call $70, and then on the river we expect, let's say, we know we've got 35% equity versus his range, and we know if we know he's going to bet the river 100% of the time, well, if we know he bets like 75% of the pot and we need 30% to call, we know we have to call turn, call river. But what happens if, let's say, instead of betting 75% of the pot, he overbet shoves here? Well, if he bets 200% of the pot, we're not going to have, if he shoves this river with 100% of his range, we're not going to have 35. I mean, we'll have 35% equity, but we won't be getting the pot odds to call because a 2x overbet shove, if he bets 488 into 242, we won't be getting the pot odds necessary to call, so we'll have to fold. So how does that play a part? Well, if you think about it logically, if we're calling $70 on the turn, and we expect him to overbet shove every single river, and we expect to have 35% equity, well, if we have to fold 100% of the rivers, then we're burning $70. Because if we call $70 on the turn and we're folding the river every single time, we're just giving away the $70. So if that's the case, and he bets the river a whole lot of the time, and we don't have the equity required to call, we're still losing money because we're folding the best hand 35% of the time on the river. I hope that makes sense, and I hope I explained it in a way that's somewhat easy to understand. It's kind of a tricky concept, I guess, but in reality, I guess it kind of breaks down to any time on the river, if you're calling with the worst hand, if you're calling with less than 50% equity, you're losing a little bit of money, and if you're folding the best hand some percentage of the time, you're also losing money. So if you kind of break it down to like a real world example, I mean, clearly he's not going to be betting this river every single time. Like, he's going to check back, he's got some showdown value with some hands, and he's not going to be value betting like all his hands that beat us. So we can expect to see a showdown, some percentage of the time, which will help us. As long as if he's betting every single river, I've shown that you kind of have to fold because you're losing, $41 if you call turn and call river, and you're losing like $70 if you have to call turn and fold every single river. So how does it really apply to an actual situation where someone might check behind some of the time? Well, I mean, if you think about it, on the turn we've got 35% equity, so that is the amount of times on average we're going to be ahead on the river, considering every single hand in your opponent's range and considering every single river card. So on average on the river we're going to be ahead 35% of the time, which is important to remember. Like, if you have 35% equity on the turn, what it really means is effectively on average 35% of the time you'll be ahead on the river, which and it's not really that high. 2/3 of the time you're going to be beat. So you have to keep that in mind. And if opponent is betting enough rivers, and you either have to fold the best hand some percentage of the time, or because you're getting pot odds, you have to call with the worst hand, you're going to be losing money. So we'll go back to the turn play, the 172 in the pot, 70 to call. So how often can we expect him to actually bet the river? Well, if we break it down into different types of hands, well, there's the actual hand that hit 3 of hearts, pretty much a blank. It's not really a great bluff card. This player here, I would say probably is not bluffing with that high of a frequency. I've already called twice. It's pretty apparent I've got something. And I just think that a player like this isn't necessarily thrilled about firing the third barrel. A lot of times they're going to be pretty happy checking back their ace high, even if it would be a good play to fire it. So, if this is his range on the turn, and we expect him to check back, a good amount of river cards, maybe he's not even value betting queen king here. If that's the case, he's checking back quite a bit. So somewhere in the neighborhood, I would imagine. What you would actually do is count up all the card combinations of hand combinations. Like 12 combos of ace king offsuit, etc. But if you just want to do a quick estimate, like, he's probably betting this river maybe 40 to 50% of the time. You can kind of look at someone's river c-bet stat to get a general idea of percentages. I think most players are generally in the low 40s to upper 60s as far as a river c-bet stat, and that's over. That's a long-term average. It's going to depend on